The morning of April 16th, 1947, began like any other along the Texas Gulf Coast, but within hours the city would witness one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in world history, a blast so powerful that it created a 15-foot tidal wave, leveled the port, ignited dozens of fires, and killed hundreds instantly. Yet despite the unimaginable scale of this catastrophe, most Americans today have never heard of it. Overshadowed by World War II's aftermath and the hopeful rise of post-war America, the Texas City disaster slipped quietly out of national memory. That forgotten morning began with nothing more alarming than the sight of a little smoke drifting from a ship's cargo hold. Texas City in 1947 was a booming industrial town built around one of the busiest ports on the Gulf Coast. The war years had turned the city into a vital hub for oil refineries, chemical plants, pipelines, and freight shipping. Huge tankers came and went daily, loading gasoline, aviation fuel, chemicals, and fertilizer destined for Europe's rebuilding effort. The city had grown fast, and though the work was dangerous, people had become used to it. Explosions, small fires, and industrial accidents were part of life, and most workers never imagined that the greatest danger they faced was quietly sitting in a ship tied to the dock. The port was crowded, the warehouses full, and railroad cars stacked with cargo lined the waterfront. Everything looked normal. The French vessel SS Grandcamp had arrived earlier in April and was being loaded with ammonium nitrate, a chemical that had played a major role in World War II. It was used not only as a fertilizer but also in explosives, and the post-war world demanded large shipments of it for farming and reconstruction. The Grand Camp carried more than 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate in thick paper sacks stacked deep inside its cargo holds, along with small arms ammunition and other supplies. What many people at the time did not fully understand was just how unstable ammonium nitrate could become when it was confined, contaminated, or exposed to heat. It was the same chemical involved in several deadly accidents in Europe and would decades later be used in the Oklahoma City bombing. But on that spring morning in Texas City, few grasped that the Grand Camp was holding an explosive force equal to several thousand tons of TNT. Around 8 a.m., longshoremen working near hold number 4 noticed smoke drifting from the cargo. At first, it did not seem serious. Small fires happened occasionally when wooden pallets scraped against metal or when workers accidentally struck sparks. The crew tried the usual method of dealing with a minor smoldering fire. They sealed the hatch and began pumping in steam to starve the flames of oxygen. What they did not realize was that heating ammonium nitrate in a closed space does not smother it, it accelerates the chemical reaction that leads to detonation. As the hold warmed, the sacks inside began to melt, creating a molten mixture that burned hotter and hotter. Instead of being contained, the fire was being fed. By now, smoke could be seen rising from the Grand Camp's deck, and curious onlookers began gathering along the pier. The fire did not appear violent, and to many people, it looked routine. Some workers even climbed rail cars to get a better look. A few city residents walked down just to watch the activity. Texas City firefighters arrived and began setting up hoses, unaware that the fire they were fighting was unlike any they had ever encountered. The heat inside the cargo hold continued to rise as pressure built beneath the sealed hatches. The ship's captain insisted that the steam system would control the fire, but witnesses later said they heard popping noises from inside the hold that suggested the chemical was already breaking down. By 9 a.m., the dock was crowded with workers, firefighters, and spectators. No one understood that they were standing only yards away from a bomb large enough to destroy an entire city block. The sacks of ammonium nitrate had reached a runaway reaction stage. The cargo hold was now a sealed pressure cooker filled with superheated gas. The deck plates were starting to bulge from the rising pressure. People remembered smelling a strange, sweet scent from the burning fertilizer. Moments later, the Grand Camp's cargo detonated. At 9:12 a.m., the ship erupted in a blinding flash that was seen miles away. The explosion instantly vaporized the Grand Camp. Witnesses described the ship lifting into the air in one enormous fireball before disintegrating. The blast wave blasted outward in all directions, flattening nearby warehouses, shattering windows 40 miles away, and knocking people off their feet across the city. Railroad cars weighing many tons were tossed through the air like toys. The explosion was so intense that it created a 15-foot tidal wave that rolled across the docks and into the city's industrial district. Nearly everyone on the pier was killed in an instant, including the entire Texas City Volunteer Fire Department. Fires erupted everywhere. Burning debris shot across the port, landing on oil tanks, warehouses, rooftops, and railroad tankers. Cars were tossed into buildings. People blocks away were thrown against walls. One witness said it felt as if the entire world had suddenly exploded. The hospitals were overwhelmed within minutes. Injured residents poured in with burns, fractures, deep cuts, and head wounds. Many more were trapped under collapsed buildings waiting for rescuers to reach them. The devastation spread rapidly beyond the port. Oil refineries caught fire, storage tanks ruptured, and the waterfront burned fiercely. The explosion ignited hundreds of smaller fires across the city, some fueled by gasoline, others by chemical stocks stored in nearby plants. Flames rose so high that they could be seen from Galveston, 20 miles away. Fire departments from surrounding towns scrambled to reach Texas City, not yet realizing that the worst part of the disaster was not over. Hidden in the smoke and flames, another ship in the harbor was beginning to burn, carrying a cargo just as dangerous as the one that had already destroyed half the port. As smoke billowed over the harbor and flames raced through the wreckage of the Grandcamp, few people realized that an even greater danger was still unfolding quietly in the chaos. Several hundred yards away sat another cargo vessel, the SS Flyer, a Liberty ship loaded with more than 1,000 tons of ammonium nitrate and nearly 500 tons of sulfur. Before the first explosion, the High Flyer had been trapped at the pier by damaged railroad cars, and another vessel moored nearby, making it impossible to move. After the destruction of the Grandcamp, burning debris showered onto the High Flyer's deck, igniting fires deep inside its holds. The crew tried desperately to contain the flames, but by then the port was already in ruins, and help was spread too thin. Firefighters arriving from nearby towns found the area around the ship too hot to approach. The High Flyer was becoming a floating powder keg, and time was running out. Through the afternoon and evening of April 16th, smoke poured from the High Flyer's cargo holds. Coast Guard officials and harbor workers debated whether they could free the ship from the dock and tow it into open water. They tried, but the wharf was so damaged and choked with debris that moving the vessel proved impossible. Everything around it was burning. The dock was buckling, and dangerous fumes filled the air. Several tugboats attempted to pull the ship away, but tangled metal and collapsed railcars prevented any movement. The heat grew worse as the sulfur cargo ignited, filling the ship's interior with a choking yellow smoke. The ammonium nitrate, once again sealed in a confined space and heated more each hour, was slowly reaching a critical point. Many workers believed the worst of the disaster had already passed, but during the long night ahead, Texas City would suffer a second blow nearly as devastating as the first. At 1:10 a.m. on April 17th, almost 16 hours after the Grandcamp exploded, the SS High Flyer detonated. The blast was enormous. People who had survived the first explosion were awakened by a thunderous roar, followed by a shock wave that tore through what was left of the port. The second ship's explosion hurled steel plates, flaming debris, and chunks of twisted metal across the harbor, damaging buildings that had remained standing after the morning disaster. A nearby ship, the SS Wilson B. Keene, was ripped apart as the High Flyer's explosion triggered a chain reaction of destruction. Fires surged once again across the waterfront, and the brief hope that the worst was over vanished instantly. Throughout the night and into the following day, firefighters, volunteers, refinery workers, and police from as far away as Houston worked tirelessly to rescue survivors. They combed through collapsed buildings, pulled people from under twisted metal, and carried the injured to makeshift triage areas set up in schools, churches, and warehouses. The Texas City Fire Department had been wiped out in the initial blast, leaving the city without its frontline responders. Neighboring towns sent every available fire truck and ambulance. The Coast Guard established command posts on what remained of the docks, while refinery workers risked their lives to shut off fuel lines and stop chemical tanks from exploding. Many of these workers had lost friends, co-workers, and family earlier that day, yet they continued fighting the fires without hesitation. But the scale of the disaster was overwhelming. Electricity was knocked out, water lines were ruptured, and communication systems were down. Families searched desperately for missing loved ones as rescuers brought bodies out of the rubble. Morgues filled quickly, forcing officials to set up temporary facilities to identify victims. Some bodies were burned beyond recognition, and others were never found. The official death toll eventually reached 581, but many historians believe the real number was significantly higher. There were migrant workers, sailors, dock laborers, and visitors at the port whose names were never recorded. Thousands of people were injured, some permanently disabled. Eyewitness reports describe hospitals struggling to treat severe burns, deep lacerations, and blunt trauma from flying debris. Across the city, homes and businesses had been destroyed. Entire neighborhoods near the port were flattened. The landscape looked like a war zone. Twisted metal, shattered concrete, and burned buildings stretched out for miles. The fires burned for days, fueled by chemicals from nearby refineries and storage tanks. Even for those who survived, life in Texas City had changed forever. In the months that followed, the disaster sparked intense legal and political battles. Victims and their families filed a massive lawsuit against the United States government, accusing officials of negligence for shipping such a dangerous chemical on poorly equipped vessels and failing to warn port workers of the risks. The case became the first major class action lawsuit ever filed against the federal government and made its way to the Supreme Court. Ultimately, the court ruled that the government could not be held liable because it was performing functions related to national policy. The decision frustrated many survivors, but it also led to major changes in safety regulations for the storage and transport of hazardous materials. Despite its enormous impact, the Texas City disaster faded from national memory. Part of the reason was timing. The world was still recovering from World War II, and newspapers were filled with stories about Europe's reconstruction, the rise of the Cold War, and America's booming post-war economy. A domestic industrial accident, no matter how deadly, struggled to hold the nation's attention. Over time, the disaster slipped into the background, remembered mostly by the families who lived through it and by historians who study industrial safety. Yet the Texas City disaster remains one of the deadliest industrial catastrophes in American history, and one of the largest non-nuclear explosions ever recorded. It reshaped the city, changed national safety standards, and left a lasting scar on the Gulf Coast. For the people of Texas City, the events of April 16th and 17th, 1947 were not just a tragic accident, they were a moment when an entire community was nearly erased in a single blinding flash. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed learning something new today, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you thought of this story.